Welcome to the Thinking Abyss podcast, a philosophical journey through consciousness, reality, and the phenomena that challenge our understanding of existence. From ancient wisdom to cutting-edge theories, we explore where philosophy meets science and curiosity leads to the edge of the unknown.
Okay, so let's kick off with this question. It's kind of amazing because it's both real science, but also almost poetry, right?
Right. It really captures the imagination.
From Edward Lorenz, back in '72. He asked, does the flap of a butterfly's wings in Brazil set off a tornado in Texas?
It sounds so simple, almost whimsical.
Yeah, but what's behind it? I mean, we're usually taught, big effects need big causes. A market crash must be some huge policy mess up. A hurricane, massive pressure systems colliding.
That's the intuitive way we think, definitely. Linear cause and effect.
But Lorenz, what he found it blows that apart. He showed that in these really complex systems, it's not about how big the first push is.
No, it's about how tiny, tiny changes get amplified exponentially. That initial nudge just gets magnified over and over.
And that's the butterfly effect.
Exactly. And that's what we're diving into today. We want to get past just the catchy phrase, understand the actual math, the science Lorenz stumbled upon.
The difference between linear and nonlinear systems, right?
Yeah. Precisely. And then we'll trace how this one idea, the sensitive dependence, how it impacts pretty much everything. Weather, obviously, but also life, history, economics, even our own minds.
It's not just A causes B, it's different.
It's exponential amplification. That's the core principle we're unpacking. It really does touch almost every field you can think of.
Okay, I'm ready. Let's get into it. And you said it started almost by accident.
Pretty much. In the early 1960s, with an early computer, a simplified weather model, and a rounding error that changed science.
So Lorenz is at MIT. He's got this early computer, a Royal McBee, I think.
Yeah, one of those room-sized beasts. And he's running simulations. He has this model of atmospheric convection, basically how air moves and heats up.
Simplified, you said.
Very simplified. Just 12 equations, trying to capture the essence of it. He runs this long simulation, gets a result printed out.
Okay. Standard procedure.
Right. Then he decides, okay, I want to look at a specific part of this simulation again, maybe in more detail. So he needs to restart it from somewhere in the middle.
Makes sense. You just type in the numbers from the printout for that point in time.
And that's exactly what he did. Here's the crucial bit. The computer internally was storing the numbers with 6 decimal places of precision, like 0.506127.
Okay, pretty precise.
But the printout, to save space or just how it was formatted, it only showed 3 decimal places.
So it showed 0.506.
Correct. So Lorenz types in 0.506 to restart the simulation. He manually truncates it. He drops the 1, 2, and 7.
A tiny difference. One part in, a few 100,000? Seems utterly insignificant.
That's what anyone would think. In any normal linear system, if you change the input by that tiny fraction, the output should change by a similarly tiny, almost unnoticeable amount.
He must have expected the second run to basically just mirror the first one, maybe drift off slightly way down the line.
Absolutely. He went off to get coffee, expecting it to just replicate the pattern.
It didn't.
Not even close. When he came back and looked at the output, for the first little while, the 2 simulations tracked each other almost perfectly. The numbers were nearly identical.
As expected.
But then, after just a few simulated days in the model, the 2 lines on the graph started to pull apart. And they didn't just drift, they diverged. Rapidly.
How rapidly?
Exponentially. Within a simulated month or so, the weather pattern generated from the 0.506 starting point looked nothing like the original pattern from 0.506127. Completely different highs and lows, different storm tracks. It was a whole different world.
Wow. Just from chopping off those last 3 decimal places.
Yeah.
So, the big question is why? Why does that minuscule change create such a massive, totally disproportionate difference later on?
Okay, this is where we hit the core concept. The system itself is nonlinear.
Nonlinear. Explain that. What's the difference?
Think simple physics. Push a toy car. Push it twice as hard, it accelerates twice as much, right? That's linear. The output is directly proportional to the input. Things scale predictably.
Okay, easy enough.
Nonlinear systems are different. The relationship between input and output isn't proportional. Crucially, they often involve feedback loops. The output of the system at one point in time feeds back in and becomes part of the input for the next point in time.
Like in his weather model. The state of the atmosphere now affects the state 5 minutes from now.
Exactly. Air pressure affects wind, which affects temperature, which affects pressure again, and so on. It's constantly cycling back on itself. And in these cycles, tiny differences don't just add up, they get multiplied. They compound, like interest, but much faster.
But hang on, lots of things have feedback loops. Like the thermostat in my house, or cruise control in a car. Those seem pretty predictable. We engineer nonlinear systems all the time, don't we?
That's a really key point. Yes, we do. But engineered systems are typically designed with negative feedback loops. They're built to be stable, to resist deviation. Your thermostat turns the heat off when it gets too hot, pushing it back to the set point.
Okay, it corrects itself.
Right. The systems Lorenz was studying weather, but also things like ecosystems or financial markets, they're full of positive feedback loops, or at least lack those strong corrective negative ones. They are inherently unstable in certain ways. Small changes aren't dampened, they get amplified. This leads to what Lorenz called sensitive dependence on initial conditions.
Sensitive dependence. That's the technical term for the butterfly effect.
Essentially, yes. It means that if you take two starting points for the system that are incredibly close together, infinitesimally close, almost identical, their future paths, their trajectories through the system's possible states, will diverge exponentially over time.
So they don't just slowly drift apart, they actively push away from each other at an accelerating rate.
Precisely. If the divergence were just linear, prediction wouldn't be a fundamental problem. But because it's exponential, any tiny uncertainty you have about the starting state, and you always have some uncertainty, gets blown up so fast that long-term prediction becomes impossible.
And this is critical. The system isn't random, right? It's following exact mathematical rules at every single step.
Absolutely fundamental. It's fully deterministic. If you knew the starting conditions with infinite precision, you could, in theory, predict the future perfectly.
But we can't.
We can never measure the state of the atmosphere or any complex system with infinite precision. It's practically impossible. Think about measuring the temperature and wind speed of every single molecule of air on Earth. Can't be done.
So the unpredictability isn't in the laws governing the system.
No, the laws are fixed. The unpredictability comes from our inability to ever know the starting point perfectly, combined with the system's inherent nature to exponentially amplify even the tiniest error in that starting knowledge.
Okay, so Lorenz sees this divergence, coins this idea of sensitive dependence.
Yeah.
And then he tries to visualize it, right? This leads to the famous strange attractor.
Yes. This is where it gets visually fascinating and connects back to the butterfly image. He plotted the state of his simple weather system, represented by 3 key variables as it changed over time. He plotted its path in a 3D mathematical state space.
State space. Like a graph showing all the possible conditions the system could be in.
Exactly. And what he found was amazing. The path that the system traced out, representing the evolving weather, never settled down into a single point, like a stable temperature, or a simple loop, like a perfectly repeating weather cycle.
It kept moving, changing.
Always changing, but, and this is the attractor part, it stayed within a definite bounded region of that state space. The simulated weather didn't fly off to infinite temperatures or pressures. It remained confined, attracted to a certain overall shape.
So it's bounded, contained, but not predictable inside those bounds.
Precisely. The line tracing the system's path never repeated itself exactly, and it never intersected itself. It just kept looping and swirling within this bounded space.
And the shape it traced.
When viewed from the right angle, it formed 2 connected lobes, like wings. It looked remarkably like a butterfly.
Wow. So the name isn't just poetic, it actually comes from the mathematical visualization of the chaos itself.
It does. It's a beautiful convergence of the math and the metaphor.
But there's more to the attractor than just the shape, right? You mentioned something about fractal dimensions. That sounds complicated.
It is, but it's key to understanding the deep structure of chaos. Normally, we think of dimensions as whole numbers. A line is 1D, a flat plane is 2D, a cube is 3D.
Right.
A fractal object, like the coastline of Britain or a snowflake, has complexity at all scales. If you zoom in, you keep seeing more detail that resembles the larger structure. These objects can have a dimension that isn't a whole number, it's a fractional dimension.
So the Lorenz attractor isn't quite 2D, not quite 3D?
Exactly. Its fractal dimension is about 2.05 or 2.06. It means the trajectory is more complex than a simple surface. It sort of fills space in a very intricate way, but it doesn't fill a complete volume.
What does that fractional dimension tell us about the system's behavior?
It tells us that the system explores an infinite number of possible states. It never repeats, but does so within a finite, bounded area. It's an attractor. The fractal geometry captures this blend of deterministic structure, the overall shape, and infinite variability, the non-repeating path within it. It's the geometric signature of chaos, order, and unpredictability woven together.
Okay, so the math is fascinating. Let's bring it back to the real world. The atmosphere, where Lorenz started, seems like the ultimate example of this. It's this huge churning fluid system.
Absolutely. It's the perfect, massive chaos laboratory. You've got interactions happening across just incredible scales, from, tiny puffs of wind caused by turbulence around a leaf measuring millimeters,
Literally the butterfly scale.
right up to giant jet streams and pressure systems spanning thousands of kilometers. And everything affects everything else. Temperature changes pressure, pressure drives wind, wind moves moisture, moisture forms clouds, clouds block sun, changing temperature. It's all recursive feedback.
So if we try to trace that poetic chain again, the butterfly in Brazil, the tornado in Texas, how does that amplification actually work physically? It can't be that the butterfly directly pushes the air all the way there.
No, of course not. It's much more subtle. The butterfly's wings create a tiny, tiny disturbance, a minuscule change in local air pressure and velocity.
Okay, almost nothing.
Almost nothing, but that tiny change interacts with the air already in motion around it. Maybe there's an existing small eddy or a slight instability in the pressure gradient. The butterfly's flap gives that instability a tiny nudge.
It exploits a pre-existing sensitivity.
Exactly. That nudge might slightly alter local wind patterns, which might then, say, affect how moisture is carried aloft just a tiny bit differently, maybe causing a small cloud to form a few minutes earlier or later, or a few meters to the side.
And clouds have bigger effects, right? Blocking sun, releasing heat.
Yes. So that slightly different cloud changes the local heating pattern, which subtly alters regional pressure. Now, this process repeats millions, billions of times across the globe, with countless tiny inputs constantly nudging the system. Over days and weeks, the accumulated effect of all these amplified tiny nudges can steer the path of a major weather system.
So the original tiny flap doesn't cause the tornado directly, but it contributes to a chain reaction that changes the conditions making the tornado possible or happen there instead of somewhere else.
Precisely. It's a cascade of amplification through an inherently unstable, sensitive system.
Which brings us back to prediction. You said there's a hard limit, an epistemological boundary. What is that limit for weather?
For detailed day-to-day weather forecasts, predicting specific temperatures, rainfall, storm locations, the practical limit seems to be around 2 weeks, maybe 14, 15 days tops.
And beyond that?
Beyond that, the initial uncertainties, those unavoidable tiny errors in measuring the starting state of the atmosphere, have been amplified so much by the system's chaotic dynamics that the forecast becomes essentially no better than a random guess, or just climatology, the average weather for that time of year.
But people always say, if we just had faster computers, better satellites, can't technology overcome this? If we could measure things just a little bit better?
That's the tough part. It's not primarily a technological limit, it's a mathematical one, baked into the nature of the equations governing fluid dynamics. Yes, better data and faster computers help. They let us start with slightly smaller initial errors and run more complex models.
So maybe push the limit from 14 days to, say, 16 days.
Perhaps, but you hit diminishing returns very, very quickly because the error growth is exponential. To gain just one more day of reliable prediction, you might need to improve your initial measurements by an enormous factor, maybe reduce the error by half or more, and then to get another day, you have to reduce the remaining error by half again.
It becomes practically impossible.
It becomes fundamentally impossible beyond a certain point. You can't measure perfectly, and the system will amplify whatever imperfection remains. It's a boundary set by the physics itself. We can't compute our way out of chaos.
That's sobering.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move beyond weather. How does this apply to living systems? Ecology, for instance.
Ecology is another fantastic example. Population dynamics, how populations of different species interact and change over time, are classic nonlinear systems. Think predator-prey relationships.
Like foxes and rabbits?
Exactly. The number of rabbits affects the number of foxes, which in turn affects the number of rabbits. It's a feedback loop. These systems can be very sensitive. A small change, maybe a slightly harsher winter that affects rabbit breeding rates just a bit, or a disease that hits the foxes, can sometimes push the whole system into a completely different pattern of boom and bust cycles.
It doesn't just slightly adjust. It can flip states.
It can flip between different stable or perhaps chaotic states.
There's that amazing real-world example from Yellowstone National Park with the wolves.
Oh yeah, the reintroduction of wolves in 1995. That's a perfect illustration of a trophic cascade triggered by a small change.
How small was the initial change?
Really small in the context of a huge ecosystem. They initially reintroduced fewer than 30 wolves into Yellowstone, which covers over 2 million acres.
A tiny input for such a vast area.
Tiny! But the wolves are a keystone predator. Their absence had allowed the elk population to explode and graze unchecked, especially along rivers.
Okay, so the wolves come back. Step one.
Step 1. Wolves prey on elk, reducing their numbers. But maybe more importantly, they changed elk behavior. The elk started avoiding open river valleys and gorges where they were vulnerable. Fear itself reshaped their grazing patterns.
Okay, so fewer elk and elk hiding more. What happens next?
Step 2. Because the elk weren't constantly eating the young shoots, vegetation along the river started to recover dramatically. Willow, aspen, cottonwood trees bounced back.
More trees and shrubs.
Step 3. That revitalized vegetation stabilized the riverbanks. Less erosion. The rivers themselves actually began to change course less often, meandering less, developing deeper pools. The physical structure of the landscape started to shift.
Whoa, the rivers changed shape because of the wolves.
In some areas, yes. Step 4. The regrown vegetation created habitats for other species. Beavers returned because they had trees for dams. Beaver dams created ponds, benefiting fish, amphibians, birds. Songbirds increased. Biodiversity shot up.
All cascading from those first few wolves.
It's a textbook example. Small input, amplified through the interconnected food web and ecosystem dynamics, leading to massive landscape-level changes. Sensitive dependence in action.
And this principle must operate at even deeper biological levels, like evolution.
Absolutely. Think about evolution, what drives it. Ultimately, it starts with genetic mutations.
Tiny changes in DNA.
Often incredibly tiny. A single letter change-of-point mutation in a gene made of thousands or millions of base pairs. That's the initial perturbation.
Seems like it would rarely matter.
Most mutations are neutral or harmful. But occasionally, by chance, a tiny mutation might confer a very slight advantage, maybe slightly better camouflage, slightly more efficient digestion, whatever.
Okay.
That tiny advantage, interacting with the selective pressures of the environment through the nonlinear dynamics of natural selection, gets amplified over generations. If individuals with the mutation reproduce just fractionally more successfully, their descendants eventually dominate the population.
And over millions of years.
That relentless amplification of initially tiny, random changes leads to major evolutionary innovations. The development of flight, complex size, photosynthesis, even consciousness. It all traces back to amplified micromutations.
It's the butterfly effects playing out of geological timescales.
You can even see it in how organisms develop. Take a single fertilized egg. How does it become a complex creature with different organs and cell types?
Cell differentiation.
Right. And that relies on gene regulatory networks. These are complex networks where genes switch each other on and off. They exhibit sensitive dependence. Tiny differences in the concentration of a signaling molecule or the timing of a gene switching on or off in one cell versus its neighbor can determine its ultimate fate.
Becomes a nerve cell instead of a skin cell.
Exactly. That tiny initial molecular difference gets amplified through cascades of gene activation, locking the cell into a specific developmental pathway. The butterfly flaps its wings at the molecular level, and the result is the intricate structure of a living being.
Okay, so if nature is full of this, human systems, history, society, economies must be even more so, right?
Yeah.
All those individual decisions, emotions, accidents.
Oh, absolutely. Human history is perhaps the ultimate complex system governed by these principles. Historians often talk about contingency, the idea that major events could have turned out very differently based on small, seemingly random occurrences.
The butterfly effect gives that idea a sort of mathematical backbone.
Precisely. It helps explain why those small events can have such disproportionately large consequences. They perturb a system that's already complex and often unstable.
The classic tragic example is always World War I. We learn about the big causes: nationalism, alliances, arms races.
All true. The system was primed for conflict, highly unstable. But the actual trigger was almost absurdly contingent: the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand.
Right, in Sarajevo. But wasn't there more to it than just the shooting?
There was a whole chain of small failures and chances. The initial group of assassins had a plan positioned along the Archduke's published route. The first guy chickened out. The next guy threw a bomb, but it bounced off the Archduke's car and exploded under the next car, injuring some officers, but not the target.
So the main assassination attempt failed.
It failed. The motorcade sped off. Later, the Archduke decided, against advice, to go visit the injured officers in the hospital.
A noble, but in hindsight, fateful decision.
Hugely fateful. They changed the route to go to the hospital, Crucially, someone forgot to tell the driver of the Archduke's car about the new route.
Yeah.
So the driver follows the original planned route and makes a wrong turn onto Franz Joseph Street.
Taking him away from where he was supposed to be going.
Right. The governor who was in the car yells, "That's the wrong way." The driver realizes his mistake, stops the car, and begins to reverse. And where does he stop? Purely by chance.
Let me guess.
Directly in front of Schiller's Delicatessen, where one of the original assassins, Gavrilo Princip, happened to be standing, probably thinking the whole thing was over.
Unbelievable. He just walks up and...
Walks up to the stalled car and fires the shots that kill the Archduke and his wife. That single wrong turn, that pause to reverse, placed the target right in front of the assassin.
And that spark ignited the powder keg of European alliances.
Exactly. A cascade triggered by a sequence of tiny contingent events amplified by a critically unstable geopolitical system.
It makes you think about those historical what-ifs, like that famous line from Blaise Pascal about Cleopatra's nose.
Ah, yes. Cleopatra's nose. Had it been shorter, the whole face of the world would have been changed.
It sounds funny, but Pascal was making a serious point, wasn't he?
He was highlighting the potential power of seemingly trivial factors in history, especially factors involving human relationships and perceptions. If Cleopatra had been perceived as slightly less attractive, would her influence over Julius Caesar and Mark Antony have been different?
And if their relationships had been different?
The political alignments, the succession struggles, the fate of Rome and Egypt, everything could have potentially diverged onto a completely different historical path. A tiny input, like physical appearance, amplified through the nonlinear dynamics of power and love.
We see modern versions of this too, maybe in technology, like the internet.
The early days of the World Wide Web are a great example. Its entire structure, its ubiquity today, hinged on a few key, potentially butterfly effect decisions.
What kind of decisions?
Well, Tim Berners-Lee's technical choices about using simple, open protocols like HTML and HTTP were crucial. But perhaps even more pivotal was the decision made by CERN, the European physics lab where he worked.
What did they decide?
In 1993, CERN made the monumental decision to release the World Wide Web technology into the public domain. Freely available, no patent, no licensing fees.
Wow. What if they had patented it?
It would likely have been a completely different internet. Growth would have been slower, controlled, maybe fragmented between competing proprietary systems. That single decision to make it open and free was like opening floodgates.
It allowed for that explosive, decentralized, bottom-up growth.
Exactly. It created the conditions for maximum nonlinear amplification. Anyone could use it, build on it, create content. That initial condition, openness, shaped the entire digital world we live in.
Okay, let's shift to economics. You called financial markets complex adaptive systems. Why are they so prone to this kind of chaotic behavior?
Because markets are driven by the interactions of millions of agents, traders, investors, consumers, banks, all making decisions based often on incomplete information, expectations about other people's expectations, and critically psychological factors.
Fear and greed, basically.
Fear, greed, herd behavior, loss aversion. These introduce powerful nonlinear feedback loops into the system.
The 2008 financial crisis seems like the ultimate example. People focus on the crash itself, but didn't it start with relatively small changes much earlier?
Absolutely. The roots weren't in some single huge policy error right before the crash. They trace back to seemingly minor shifts years earlier, things like a gradual loosening of mortgage lending standards.
Letting slightly riskier borrowers get loans to the subprime market.
Exactly. That was the initial small change. Then, financial innovation created complex products like mortgage-backed securities, MBS, and collateralized debt obligations, CDOs, that bundled these mortgages together.
Slicing and dicing the risk.
Slicing, dicing, and crucially amplifying it. The complexity hid the underlying risk. A small increase in defaults in, say, Florida could now ripple through these complex instruments held by banks all over the world.
And then the ratings agencies played a role.
Yes, another seemingly small tweak. Minor adjustments in the models used by credit rating agencies led to these incredibly complex and risky instruments being given top AAA rating.
Which made them seem safe, so everyone bought them.
Right. So you have these small initial changes, slightly looser lending, new complex instruments, slightly adjusted rating models, each amplifying the effect of the others within a highly interconnected global financial system. When the housing market turned, the cascade was devastating.
And today, with high-frequency trading, these effects are even faster. We see flash crashes.
Precisely. Algorithms are programmed to react to tiny price movements in microseconds. If one algorithm starts selling heavily based on a small dip,
Others detect that selling and sell too.
instantly, it creates an automated positive feedback loop. A tiny initial wobble gets amplified into a massive market plunge in minutes or even seconds, often before humans can even figure out what's happening. The speed itself adds another layer of chaotic potential.
And human psychology still plays a part, even with the algorithms.
Oh, definitely. Because ultimately, humans program the algos, and human traders are still watching. If they see a flash crash starting, panic can set in that herd behavior kicks in again. A small bit of bad news doesn't just cause a small drop. It can trigger a disproportionate wave of selling based on fear, making the crash far worse than the initial news might objectively warrant. Human emotion is a powerful nonlinear amplifier.
Okay, let's turn this lens inward. The human brain, if anything's a complex nonlinear system.
It's the ultimate one, arguably. You've got, 86 billion neurons, each connected to thousands of others, trillions of connections constantly adjusting their strength. The number of possible states is astronomical.
So every thought, feeling, decision, it's emerging from this incredibly complex network.
Exactly. Tiny changes the firing of a few neurons. Subtle shifts in neurotransmitter levels, the strengthening or weakening of a single synapse can propagate through the network and lead to vastly different macroscopic outcomes, like making a different choice or recalling a different memory.
How does this relate to something like memory? How we form memories and how they shape who we are?
Memory formation is a beautiful example of a micro-level butterfly effect. When you have an experience, it activates a certain pattern of neurons. According to Hebb's rule, neurons that fire together wire together. The connections between those active neurons get slightly stronger.
A physical change in the brain's wiring.
A tiny physical change. But the brain is a massively interconnected recursive system. That slightly stronger connection changes how future signals flow through that part of the network. It biases the system.
So the next time a similar input comes along,
It's more likely to follow that strengthened pathway. The memory gets reinforced. And over time, countless experiences making tiny modifications, amplified through this network effect, literally shape our patterns of thought, our reactions, our personality. Who we are is an emergent property of these accumulated, amplified microchanges.
this framework must be relevant for understanding mental health issues too. You mentioned depression earlier.
Yeah, many mental health challenges seem to involve these kinds of dynamics, particularly dysfunctional feedback loops. Depression might start with subtle biochemical changes, maybe slightly elevated stress hormones, or a small imbalance in serotonin.
The initial nudge.
The initial nudge. But then cognitive patterns kick in. Rumination is a classic example. A negative thought triggers feelings of sadness or anxiety, which leads to more negative thoughts, which reinforces the negative feelings, which might further alter brain chemistry.
A downward spiral. A positive feedback loop reinforcing the negative state.
Exactly. The system gets locked into a stable but dysfunctional attractor state. The initial small change gets amplified and maintained by these cognitive and emotional feedback loops, making it incredibly hard to break out of. The neural pathways associated with depression become deeply entrenched.
So if the problem is a stuck feedback loop, then therapy.
Hmm.
Is it about trying to introduce a small perturbation to break that loop?
That's a really powerful way to think about psychotherapy through the lens of chaos theory. The therapist's role can be seen as introducing carefully chosen small inputs into that stuck system.
Like a specific question.
Right.
Or an insight.
Exactly. A well-timed question, a reframing of a thought, a suggested behavioral change. These are small perturbations aimed at disrupting the negative cycle. Because the system is sensitive, sometimes a seemingly minor insight or change can cascade through the patient's cognitive and emotional network.
The aha moment.
The aha moment that starts to unravel the old patterns and allows the system to reorganize itself into a healthier state. It helps explain why sometimes small therapeutic interventions can lead to surprisingly large and lasting changes. You're leveraging the system's sensitivity.
Okay, stepping back out now to society as a whole. We live in this hyper-connected world. Information spreads like wildfire sometimes.
Social networks are textbook examples of systems ripe for chaotic dynamics. The spread of information, rumors, trends Even behaviors like adopting a new technology, it often follows models very similar to epidemic spreading.
One person tells two friends, they each tell two friends. Exponential growth.
Exactly. And because of digital networks, the potential speed and scale of these cascades are unprecedented. A single tweet, a single video can potentially reach millions almost instantly.
But why does one specific video go viral while millions of others just disappear? Is it purely random, or is there a dynamic at play?
There's definitely a strong element of chance in the initial seeding, but network science points to a principle called preferential attachment.
Preferential attachment.
Basically, things that are already popular tend to become even more popular. In a network, nodes, people, websites, videos that already have many connections or high visibility are more likely to attract new connections or views.
The rich get richer effect.
Precisely. So, if a piece of content, perhaps purely by luck, gets seen and shared by a few influential users early on,
It gets an initial boost.
that initial boost gives it visibility. More people see it, some share it, its visibility grows further, attracting even more attention. It's a positive feedback loop driven by early, potentially random success.
So the butterfly flap might just be the random chance of who was online at the right time.
It could be something that small. The timing, the first few people who happen to see it, maybe a slight algorithmic quirk that promotes it initially. These tiny variations in the starting conditions can determine whether something fizzles out or explodes globally.
We saw a tragic but incredibly powerful example of this with the start of the Arab Spring, didn't we?
Yes, the self-immolation of Mohamed Bouazizi in Tunisia in late 2010. In itself, it was a desperate act of protest by one individual against local corruption.
A single tragic event.
But the context was a region with deep-seated political and economic frustrations, a system, you could say, that was highly sensitive, unstable. When the story and, crucially, images and videos of Bouazizi and the subsequent local protests started spreading via social media,
It hit that sensitive system.
it acted as the spark, the critical perturbation. It resonated with millions facing similar issues. The initial event was amplified exponentially through Facebook, Twitter, Al Jazeera,
Cascading across borders.
cascading across North Africa and the Middle East, fueling protests, connecting activists, and ultimately contributing to the fall of long-standing regimes. A single localized act amplified by technology within a sensitive socio-political system, triggering region-wide transformation. It's a stark, modern example of the butterfly effect in human affairs.
Wow. Okay, so tracing this through math, nature, history, our minds. It leads to some really deep philosophical territory, doesn't it? This idea of the butterfly effect, does it make us feel more powerful or less?
That's the fascinating paradox it presents about human agency.
How so? On one side, it feels like it diminishes agency, right? If the ultimate consequences of my actions are swamped by the system's chaotic dynamics, if they depend more on tiny initial conditions I can't control than on my actual intentions.
Then maybe our intentions don't matter as much as we think. We push a button, but the complex machine determines the real outcome. The butterfly flaps, but isn't responsible for the tornado. We seem like cogs in a vast, unpredictable machine.
That feels disempowering. But the flip side,
The flip side is that if even the tiniest action, the flap of a wing, a rounding error, a single choice can potentially cascade into enormous consequences, then everything we do becomes potentially significant.
every small act matters.
Potentially, yes. A kind word, an ethical decision in business, choosing to share accurate information instead of wire, deciding to make your research open like CERN did. These small acts, injected into the sensitive network of human interaction, could be the butterfly flap that triggers a positive cascade.
So it magnifies agency in a way. We matter more than we realize because we're nodes in this sensitive system.
Exactly. We're not isolated actors whose impact is purely local. We are participants, and our participation ripples outwards in ways we can't possibly track, but which might be profound.
But that leads to a tricky question about moral responsibility. If I genuinely can't foresee the ultimate consequences of my actions, good or bad, how can I be held truly responsible for them?
That's a classic ethical dilemma highlighted by chaos theory. If causality is this complex, branching, unpredictable chain, pinning down responsibility for distant outcomes becomes almost impossible.
So what's the ethical response? Just give up.
No, I think the sophisticated response is to shift the focus. If we can't reliably control or predict the ultimate outcomes, maybe our moral focus should be on what we can control, the intentions and the ethics of the actions themselves.
Focus on the input, not the unknowable output.
Precisely. Knowing that our actions will ripple outwards in complex ways, we have a heightened responsibility to ensure the initial act itself is well-intentioned, ethical, and carefully considered. We take our choices seriously because their effects are potentially huge and unpredictable. Act with integrity, plant good seeds, even if you can't know exactly what will grow.
That makes sense. And what does all this unpredictability mean for trying to manage big systems, like in public policy or engineering?
It definitely calls for humility. It tells us that trying to achieve perfect long-term prediction and top-down control of complex systems like the economy or the climate, or even preventing all crime, is likely futile.
Like earthquake prediction. We know the plates move, but predicting the exact time and place.
Remains incredibly difficult, probably fundamentally limited by the chaotic dynamics of rock fractures and stress accumulation. The system is too sensitive to tiny variations.
So if perfect control isn't realistic, what should policymakers or designers aim for?
The focus shifts towards resilience, adaptability, and robustness. Instead of trying to build rigid systems that rely on perfect prediction, you build systems that can withstand unexpected shocks and adapt to changing conditions.
Like building diverse economies instead of relying on one industry, or designing power grids that can reroute power if one part fails.
Exactly. Or in environmental policy, focusing on maintaining biodiversity because diverse ecosystems are generally more resilient to change than monocultures. It's about fostering systems that can absorb perturbations, maybe even guide cascades towards positive outcomes, rather than trying to eliminate unpredictability altogether. Learn to manage the chaos, not pretend you can abolish it.
It seems like the butterfly effect forces us into a more mature relationship with uncertainty. It's not just randomness, it's a different kind of order.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Chaos isn't disorder. It's a deeper, more complex form of order, one that follows deterministic laws at every step, yet remains fundamentally unpredictable in its long-term unfolding due to that extreme sensitivity.
It's lawful but unknowable in detail.
Yes. And accepting that paradox, moving away from a purely mechanical view of the world towards embracing this intricate, interconnected living complexity, well, it can be quite liberating, actually. Hashtag tag outro.
We definitely covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah.
From that tiny rounding error in Lorenz's lab.
All the way to the limits of weather forecasting, how ecosystems rearrange themselves, why history takes unexpected turns.
How financial markets crash, how our own brains build who we are, and even how societies can transform almost overnight.
And it all circles back to that core idea: sensitive dependence in nonlinear systems, interconnectedness and amplification.
The big takeaway for me seems to be this idea of being participants, not just observers or controllers.
Exactly. We're not fully in charge, steering the ship exactly where we want, but neither are we just helpless passengers. We're part of the crew, part of the system itself. And our actions, even small ones, contribute to the ship's course in ways we might not expect.
It requires, as you said, a certain humility, accepting the limits of our knowledge and control.
But also recognizing the potential significance of our choices within that complex web.
So maybe the final thought for everyone listening, reflecting on this deep dive,
Is to really take that butterfly metaphor to heart.
Yeah. The butterfly effect isn't just out there in the weather or the markets. It reminds us that, in this incredibly complex world, we are all butterflies.
Our choices, our actions, even our words, they ripple out.
Rippling through systems, our families, workplaces, communities, the digital world, in ways we can barely comprehend. Maybe a small act of honesty or curiosity or supporting someone.
Yeah.
Maybe that aligns with some instability in the system in just the right way.
And contributes, seen or unseen, to something better emerging.
It feels like both a huge responsibility.
And also, strangely, a kind of liberation.
Yeah. We matter, maybe more than we think, but in ways we can't fully grasp or control. So perhaps the question to leave everyone with is, what small, meaningful flap might you make next?